Babur, a future conqueror. In 1488, the year that the sea route to India was discovered by the Portuguese, Babur was 5 years old. In 1526, he was to become the first of those great Moguls who were to rule India for 300 years until the coming of the British. Babur had two mighty ancient ancestors. One was Genghis Khan, the first and most famous of the Mongol conquerors, who by 1224 had made himself ruler over a vast area of Asia. The other was Timur, or Tamerlane, who lived 100 years later, and was half Turk and half Mongol. The capital of his empire was the large and splendid city of Samarkand. Babur was born in the fertile valley of Fergana in the much smaller town of Andijan, on the caravan trail between Samarkand and China. Caravans coming from China often stopped to rest in the clover meadows just outside the city walls. Drivers could be seen lifting the cargo of silks and jewels from the backs of the long-haired yaks and Mongol ponies that had carried them through the mountains onto horses that would carry them to Samarkand. It was a slow, tedious journey over the mountains and desert, and a dangerous one. In the mountains east of Andijan one winter, a caravan was caught in a narrow pass by the deep snow, and all but 2 men had frozen to death. These men were rescued by Babur's father. It was through his father Omar Sheikh that Babur was descended from Timur, and through his mother from Genghis Khan. It was his mother's father who gave him the name of Babur, which was really a nickname meaning tiger. When he was just a year old, his grandfather, who was Khan of Stone City, had come riding into Andijan to attend the Mongol ceremony of having the boy's head shaved for the first time. The old man had asked what name the baby had been given, and was told Zahir ad-Din Muhammad, meaning bearer of the faith of Muhammad. "That's too long a name for such a little tiger," he laughed. So from then on, grandfather called the baby boy Babur, and everyone else did the same. The year that he was 5, Babur was taken by his father Omar Sheikh on his first visit to Samarkand. Sultan Ahmed, Babur's uncle, the oldest of his father's brothers, had inherited the ancestral throne in Samarkand. He had invited his 3 brothers, who were all jealous of one another, to attend a peace festival. As part of the festival, it had been arranged that Babur should marry Ahmed's small daughter Ayesha. The 5-year-old cousins did not like each other. Ayesha soon ran away and hid, and Babur was glad of it. The opinion of these royal children of Asia, however, mattered no more than that of those royal 2-year-olds of Europe, Catherine of Aragon and Arthur of England, whose betrothal in that same year was also used to seal a treaty. On one soft summer day, slim, dark-eyed 10-year-old Babur sat cross-legged under a shady tree by a river, eating a very large, very juicy, very delicious melon. Not far away, his short, fat, amiable father, Omar Sheikh, was talking with the man who grew the melons which were known as Lord Timur's. Babur understood why. Nothing but the very best could be named for that great ancestor of his, whose palace and tomb he had seen in Samarkand. Babur would never forget what he saw on that visit, especially the echoing mosque and the painting of Lord Timur fighting with the elephants of India. With a deep sigh of satisfaction, Babur finished the luscious melon just as his father called to him, saying that they would go now to the pigeon house. He jumped on his horse that had been grazing nearby, and the man and boy rode off up the trail in the direction of Akshi, the oldest, highest fortress in their valley. Babur never saw his father so blissfully happy as when he was feeding his pigeons, the air filled with their fluttering wings as they circled him from turban to slippers. The fortress of Akshi had once been Omar Sheikh's home, but was now deserted except for the pigeons whose house teetered on the edge of the cliff. The royal family now lived in Andijan, where the dusty streets of the town came right up to the castle walls. Until Babur was 6, he had lived in the harem with his sister, his mother, and his grandmother, who all loved him dearly, each in her own way. At 6 he had begun to live in his father's part of the castle and to ride with him through the valley, stopping as they had this morning to sample the fruit and melons. The valley of Fergana was so rich and fertile that it was the envy of Omar Sheikh's older brother, who would take it from him if he could. Omar Sheikh did not trust even his oldest brother, the Sultan Ahmed, who had held the peace festival. How would it be, he would sometimes say to Babur, if he, Omar Sheikh, should start out one day and conquer Samarkand? Then, as they were riding along, he would go on to imagine great deeds of bravery and daring that he might accomplish, but never would. He was too good-natured and easy-going. Babur knew that. But as to Samarkand, how wonderful it would be to be the sultan and ruler of that great city, which he supposed had been built by the great Lord Timur, until he studied history. Then Babur learned, as he told his father, that it had been built 1,600 years earlier by Alexander, a Greek who had conquered northern India, but had lost it again, just as Lord Timur had. Omar Sheikh knew almost no history, reading little else other than the Koran, but he wanted his son Babur to study everything: poetry, music, astronomy, history, mathematics, as well as the teachings of the Prophet. Omar Sheikh was not much of a soldier and was too fat for a horseman, but he was already having a rough old warrior teach Babur how to ride, how to handle the scimitar, the saber, how to shoot moving objects with the short Turkish bow, and how to hit targets that were behind him while hanging from his saddle. Each day Babur studied with his tutor, indoors by the brazier in winter, outside in the orchard garden when the weather was mild. He was quick to learn and helped his smaller half-brothers with arithmetic and algebra, using the same numerals and decimal system that the Arabs had carried into Spain. His books were written in Arabic and Persian, though he spoke a form of Turkish. Jacob, a clever young lord, taught Babur to play polo. He also warned him that when he became the sheik, he must find a stronger ruler to protect him, for, as he said, if a royal eagle does not fly over you, a black crow will pick your bones. The old judge, most wise and upright of his father's advisers, told Babur that a strong ruler was not enough to rely on. The only sure protection for any man lay in following the will of Allah. All those words and warnings Babur was to remember in the fearful days of dangers so soon to come upon him. Old Qasim, master of the household, was the first to smell danger in the wind and to warn Omar Sheikh. The Sultan Ahmed of Samarkand, he said, and the new Khan of Stone City were seen riding together towards Fergana, grazing their horses ever closer and closer. That meant they planned to invade the valley and attack Andijan. Omar Sheikh heard the words, but did not heed the meaning, and as it happened, he never had to face the attack. One afternoon he rode off alone to Akshi to feed his pigeons, stepped into the pigeon house, and as Babur recorded in his diary, the pigeon house fell down the cliff with its pigeons and with Omar Sheikh, who took his flight to the other world. That month, at 12 years of age, I became king of Fergana. From that day, the life of the boy king became one long series of hairbreadth escapes. At first, Babur confessed, I could not help crying a good deal. But he kept saying his 5 daily prayers and kept believing that God alone could put matters right. Strengthened by that faith, he survived to become, years later, the ruler of northern India, the first of the great Mughals. Ivan III defies the Mongol Khan. About the time that Genghis Khan's grandson Kublai Khan had conquered China, another grandson, Batu, conquered Russian land along the Volga River. Since then, 200 years had passed, but the Mongol rulers were still there on the Volga River, still demanding tribute from the Grand Duke of Muscovy, and the Grand Duke, with an exaggerated idea of their power, was still paying it. "And how much longer do you intend to pay it?" demanded Sophia. "Do you intend to be a slave to them forever?" This was the Empress of Russia speaking to her husband, Ivan III, who seemed unable to screw up courage enough to throw off the age-old custom of groveling before the Mongol Khans. She called it humiliating and disgraceful, and spoke of the Mongols as Tartars, a scornful name used by the Europeans for all nomad tribes living east of the Black Sea. The Russians also called the nomads along the Volga River the Golden Horde, from the large golden-yellow pavilions or tents they carried with them on the plains, in which were still to be seen lined up along the Volga outside their city of Sarai. Just outside of Moscow there was a spot on the road where, following the custom of his ancestors, Ivan must go on foot carrying a goblet of mare's milk to meet an emissary of the Khan, or kiss the stirrups of the Khan himself. At last, in 1476, Sophia's prodding bore fruit. When the yearly summons came from the Khan of the Volga to appear before him, Ivan III sent the Khan a hostile reply, and when a second Tartar envoy arrived, he stomped on the Khan's image, which he was expected to revere. The break had been made. What would be the penalty? 4 years of uncertainty followed. Then, in 1480, the Khan of the Volga set forth for Moscow, heading an army of wild-riding horsemen, armed with scimitars and short Turkish bows. Horsetail banners flying, they dashed across the windy plains and brought up short on the bank of the Oka River, not many miles from Moscow. Ivan was terror-stricken. Sending Sophia rushing out of the city toward Archangel with their year-old son Basil, he was about to follow when an angry mob blocked his way, screaming their grievances. "You, our Tsar, took our rubles to pay the Khan, and you did not pay him. Now he threatens our lives, and you do not protect us." Russian generals and soldiers were gathering on the Oka River. That, they said, was where he belonged, there with the army. The bishop agreed with the people. "Go and face the Khan," they told him. "For the good of your soul, God will exact payment from you for the blood of your people if you allow it to be shed." To make sure of his departure, the Metropolitan came from the cathedral of the Archangel Michael to bless Ivan as a soldier of the cross and speed him on his way. Bells, large and small, rang and clanged as the hesitant defender finally rode away to join the encampment on the Oka River. There he found an army of 150,000 men in a golden pavilion waiting for him, as rich and elaborate as that of a Mongol Khan. Safely inside the handsome tent, Ivan sat down, but would not even look out across the river for fear of seeing an army of Mongol horsemen there, ready to destroy him. Actually, the far side of the river was peaceful. Horses were grazing, but there was no camp in sight, not one golden pavilion to be seen. The officers urged Ivan to give them orders to move against the enemy, but in vain. Priests came to plead with him after the officers had failed to move him. It was no use. Ivan would not budge. Counselors finally suggested that since he refused to fight, he might ask the Khan for a peaceful settlement. That Ivan agreed to do. The envoy sent to the Khan returned with this answer: "Let Duke Ivan come in person, kiss the stirrups of the Khan, and pay the tribute that he has not paid for years past." This Ivan would not do, nor would he move forward. He simply sat. Weeks passed, autumn cold set in, the river began to freeze. Soon the soldiers could have walked across the ice, and at last the Tsar issued the command to move, but not across the river, back to Moscow. And so ended the ridiculous encounter. For some unknown reason, instead of pursuing the retreating Russians, the Tartars also retreated all the way back to their city on the Volga. The Khan was later murdered in his sleep and his sons overthrown by a rival, the Tartar Khan of the Crimea. The Golden Horde along the Volga was no longer a menace. After this absurd no-battle victory on the Oka River, no tribute was ever paid by a Russian ruler to a Mongol Khan. Kings and princes of Europe were now becoming somewhat curious about this mysterious land called Muscovy, which lay on the edge of Asia, and about Muscovy's Grand Duke, who had begun calling himself Caesar. Ivan III, too, began looking westward beyond his immediate neighbors, Lithuania and Poland, toward the kings and princes of Europe, though even the Roman emperor seemed to him a feeble creature compared to that mighty Shah of Persia, the powerful Sultan of Turkey, and the Mongol Khans of Asia. Ivan's first real contact was with Italy. 3 years after his new wife had come from Rome, Italian architects were at work in Moscow. It had been Sophia's idea to send for them. Hardly had she set foot in that crude city made of wood than she began to think of having all the old buildings of the Kremlin replaced with beautiful palaces of stone and marble. Ivan was easily persuaded because he wanted stronger walls built about the Kremlin. Some of the old cathedrals also needed rebuilding, but for that Ivan III would not trust an Italian, whose design might be that of a Roman Catholic cathedral. He employed Russians, who knew what a Greek Orthodox church should be like. That is why, in Moscow, exotic cathedrals with colorful onion-shaped domes stand side by side with marble palaces of classic design. In 1486, a German named Nicholas Poppel ventured, out of curiosity, as far as Moscow, appeared at the court of Ivan III, and rushed back to Vienna to report what he had seen. The German Emperor, Frederick III, sent him back at once to announce to this reportedly important Duke of Muscovy that he, the Emperor, would be willing to grant the Grand Duke the higher title of King. To that condescending offer, Ivan III sent this haughty reply: "We have been emperor of our land since the beginning, and from our earliest forefathers, and do hold our commission from God himself, even as they." He signed himself Tsar of all Russia. Ivan III, the Grand Duke of Muscovy, might call himself Tsar of all Russia, but that was as yet an empty title, for there was no such nation as Russia. It was, however, the firm purpose of the new Tsar that there should be one. He intended to draw all the surrounding steppes and forests into a Russian nation, with Moscow at the heart of it. He had already absorbed ancient Novgorod, adding a vast northern area to his original Muscovy. Now he looked towards Lithuania, and by 1492 was to conquer a large area of that western land and add it to his growing empire. So, in those years just preceding the discovery of America, the lands of Russia, as well as those of France, Spain, and England, were being welded into a nation. Only Germany and Italy were to remain as they had been during the Middle Ages, broken up into small independent states. Germany was more united than Italy. The German princes of state and church acknowledged a sort of loyalty to the emperor who was elected by them. They sent representatives to his imperial diet of council, and though the emperor had no political power over them, they occasionally voted him a little money. In Italy, there was no unity whatever. All that kept any semblance of peace between city-states was the influence of Lorenzo de' Medici. When he should be gone, peace in Italy would also be gone, and the golden years of Florence as leader of the Italian Renaissance would have come to an end. Lorenzo the Magnificent. One day in the spring of 1489, shortly before his 40th birthday and 3 years before his death, Lorenzo the Magnificent was seated at a table in one of the long upper windows of the Medici palace that looked down on the inner courtyard in Donatello's statue of David. On the dark table that stood at right angles to the window lay an unopened letter, which a few moments before had been delivered by a messenger from Milan. Also spread before Lorenzo were the pages of an illuminated manuscript and various small treasures intended for the Medici Museum, one a piece of ivory so delicately carved that he had been examining it through a magnifying glass. After a few moments he laid it aside, reached for the letter from Milan, and broke the seal. For a brief second he closed his eyes to endure a sharp pain due to gout from which he suffered extremely. He then unfolded the letter, a mixture of expressions crossing his face as he read it. The letter was from his friend Ludovico Sforza, the ruler of Milan, often called Il Moro, or the Moor, due to his complexion, which was almost as dark as that of the Moors of North Africa. Il Moro was writing about Leonardo da Vinci, who was then at his court. 6 years ago Sforza had written asking Lorenzo to recommend someone to make an equestrian statue of his father, Francesco Sforza. Lorenzo had unhesitatingly recommended Leonardo da Vinci, who then for 5 years had had a studio in the Medici gardens. Now Il Moro's patience was exhausted. Leonardo, it seemed, had been making hundreds of sketches and clay models of snorting horses in all possible positions, but was never well enough satisfied to set Father Sforza on the horse and complete the statue. Would Lorenzo recommend another sculptor to finish it? Lorenzo could well understand Il Moro's impatience. At the same time, he appreciated Leonardo's desire for perfection. Taking his quill, he quickly scratched a reply, saying that he could think of no one better to finish the statue than Leonardo himself. Sculpture at this time was Lorenzo's special interest. He had recently established a school in his garden where the marvelous collection of ancient Greek and Roman figures would serve as an inspiration for the pupils. As a teacher, he had engaged a former pupil of his grandfather's famous old sculptor, Donatello. Ghirlandajo, a well-known painter of Florence, had been asked to select his most promising pupils to be enrolled in the new school. One of these budding sculptors, a boy of 14, had taken a discarded scrap of marble and carved the head of a faun. He was very busy polishing it one morning when, glancing up, he saw the great Lorenzo himself, looking rather amused. "This faun you are making is old," he said, "yet he has all his teeth. Are not aged men always lacking a tooth or two? The boy took his chisel and cleverly chipped out a tooth. Lorenzo, watching, asked his name and that of his father. Michelangelo, replied the boy, and gave the name of his father as Ludovico Buonarroti. Michelangelo Buonarroti, tell your father when you go home this evening that I want to speak to him. Full of excitement at being singled out, Michelangelo delivered the message. His father flew in the same kind of rage as he had a year ago when the boy had wanted to become a painter. He would go and talk to the great de Medici, because he had to, but give permission for him to make a common stone-cutter out of his son, or ruin him with evil living, that he would never do. But how could the good man refuse when the magnificent Lorenzo explained so graciously what his intentions were? You have a gifted son, he said, in your Michelangelo. I am asking him to live here as one of my family, to study and become a sculptor. This will give me great pleasure, knowing that one day he will do honor to us all and to Florence. The charm of the great patron, so unaffected and irresistible, brought a warm response from the boy's father. Not Michelangelo alone, said he, but all of us with our lives and our abilities are at the pleasure of your magnificence. In what position, Lorenzo then asked, would the good man desire for himself? Buonarroti replied that as he had never practiced any art or trade, he could think of nothing at the time. Later he asked for a place in the customs office that had fallen vacant, feeling able to fulfill its duties decently. Lorenzo de Medici at this time had 3 sons about the age of Michelangelo. Pietro, the oldest, was 18 and handsome, but arrogant and unpleasant, quite unlike his gracious father. He showed no promise for success as a ruler. Giuliano, the youngest, was 10, a charming little boy whom everyone loved. Giovanni, the middle boy, who was to become famous as Pope Leo X, was Michelangelo's age. He was a good-natured, generous boy with a large appetite. He also had a love for everything that was beautiful, music, painting, sculpture, and especially books. His high office in the church came when he was 7. That year Louis XI, who was then dying, made him an Archbishop of France, being grateful to his father for many favors, especially for sending him the holy monk. At 13, through his father's influence with the Pope, Giovanni had been made a cardinal, the youngest ever to wear the red hat. Giulio, an 11-year-old cousin, clever and sharp as a whip, was also part of the family. He was to become Pope Clement VII. It was soon discovered by the Medici boys that while Michelangelo was very talented, he had a bad disposition. One day he appeared at the dinner table with a broken nose. One of the pupils at the art school later told how it had happened. We used to go, he said, to one of the chapels to practice drawing by copying the paintings, and it was Michelangelo's habit to tease and torment everyone. One day I got more angry than usual, and clenching my fist, I gave him such a blow on the nose that I felt the bone and cartilage go down like a biscuit beneath my knuckles, and this mark of mine he will carry to the grave. Carnivals, processions, and festivals. These Lorenzo put on, as always, for the amusement of the people. They varied from very beautiful pageants and lovely spectacles to wild, drunken revels, corrupt like the ancient festivals of Bacchus. But it was said that Lorenzo could make even corruption seem charming. Granacci, an older friend of Michelangelo who first encouraged him to study painting, designed floats, chariots, and costumes. The poet Poliziano, the boy's tutor, wrote love poems to be sung at the May dances of Tuscany, which Lorenzo also revived. These were often danced on the broad piazza in front of the Duomo. There one day the people of Florence saw and heard something very different, but exciting too, in a terrifying way. A monk in a long black hooded robe, with a dark face and burning eyes, strode across the piazza, mounted the steps of a white marble platform, and began to speak. In a voice tense with emotion, he denounced Lorenzo de' Medici and all that he did and stood for. The name of the monk was Savonarola. He was the prior of the Dominican monastery of San Marco, built by Cosimo de' Medici, grandfather of the man he now consigned to eternal damnation. "What are these shows, these vile festivals?" cried the monk. "The work of a despot. Why does he put them on? To amuse the people of Florence, so that he may run the government as a tyrant. What is that Greek and Roman art which he promoted but shameless display of naked men and women idolizing heathen gods? Is this beauty, I ask you? You women who glory in your ornaments and your hair, are you beautiful? No, you are ugly, I tell you." Enter the Duomo. Look at the man or woman kneeling there in prayer. There you will see true beauty, the beauty of God shining in his or her face, pure beauty as in the face of an angel. Lorenzo was disturbed at first. Why should a friar from a monastery which his grandfather had founded flail out at something of which he knew so little as the government of a state? What had Florence been before the Medici gained control? A republic, yes, but in name only. Only 1/30 of the people had the right to vote. The strong oppressed the weak. Yet Savonarola was calling that a time of freedom. Lorenzo tried to appease the angry monk. He went to Mass at San Marco and made rich gifts to the convent. Savonarola scorned them as bribes for him to be silent, saying, "A faithful dog does not stop barking in his master's defense because a bone is thrown to him." Throngs came to hear the flamboyant preacher denounce evils of which he made them all feel guilty. The huge Duomo was crowded to the doors when he gave his Lenten sermon before Easter in 1492. By this time Lorenzo had given up trying to silence Savonarola. He was too ill even to attend to the business of government. Leaving that to Pietro, he was moved to the country villa, where both his grandfather and father had also died. Physicians prescribed a mixture of jewels as remedy for the intense pain in his stomach. As he grew worse, he kept regretting that he would not be able to complete his collection of manuscripts. The condemnation of Savonarola also distressed him. As he was dying, he sent for the monk, begging him to hear his last confession. Savonarola came, gave him absolution on 3 conditions: that he mend his ways if he should recover, that he meet death with courage, and that he have faith in God's mercy. April 8, 1492, Lorenzo de' Medici died, aged 43, just 2 years older than Christopher Columbus, who, in October of that same year, was to discover the New World.